Good afternoon, and welcome to the first session of the Road to Zero program here at MIPIM 2023. My name is Lisette van Doorn, and I'm the Chief Executive for Europe from Urban Land Institute. ULI Sea Change, or decarbonization program that I'll talk a bit more about in a minute, is delighted to be partnering with MIPIM on this dedicated program to address the industry's journey to net zero. We're also very proud to be partnering with the many leading real estate and sustainability organizations that are driving transformative change for our industry. It's only through collaboration that we will remain on track to meet our responsibilities as part of the Paris Agreement. The dedicated Road to Zero zone that you're sitting in right now is 400 square meters. But I know you will all agree with me that the decarbonization challenge we face spreads to every square meter of this show and every company and person represented here at MIPIM and far beyond. Indeed, this is a challenge without borders and one that must unite us across the industry and along the value chain. To support its members and the industry, ULI launched the Sea Change program just over a year ago. Along with a leading group of our corporate members, we recognized the need for practical solutions that remove the barriers to speed up and scale up the decarbonization of the built environment. This also meant creating a level playing field that in this fragmented industry, the tools, education, and practical solutions are available to all companies, large and small. Through my work at ULI, and especially our Sea Change work, I'm privileged to have a perspective across all the different working parts of the industry and to engage with a range of stakeholders. It's with this vantage point that I'm calling today for the industry to come together and unite on the only way forward. To accelerate change, we must put retrofitting of our existing building stock at the heart of decarbonization. And to demonstrate that, I want to talk about 4 different points today. The business case, the urgency, the behavioral change, and the upside potential. Within the real estate industry, professionals understand numbers best. So let's start with a few numbers. For retrofitting, there are just a few statistics that you need to keep in mind. First, at least 85% of buildings in Europe existing today are still expected to be standing in 50 years' time. That figure alone tells us that our decarbonization challenge cannot be solved through new build. Second, as you've probably heard before, 39% of all emissions globally come from the built environment. And about 1/3 of that comes from embodied carbon. That's all emissions related to the materials, construction process, transport, to the building site, etc. Of the total emissions globally, that's 13%. And for that 85% of existing building stock that will still be there in 50 years' time, these emissions happened already in the past. And by reusing that existing building stock, huge savings can be achieved. So let's move on to the urgency by, again, looking at a few statistics. We are currently retrofitting at a pace of 0.2% per year, which is just not fast enough. To meet our Paris responsibilities, this needs to be at least 2 or 3%, so times 100. So far, however, all these statistics that I've just shared have not been enough to help move the needle and create collective action across stakeholders. Generally, it's regulation that creates the sense of urgency when things need to change and a level playing field needs to be created. However, So far with climate change, that has not been the case. We're starting to see things changing, for example, with SFDR, that I'll talk about more later, and more legislation coming at country and city level. However, with existing regulation focused on climate change, while existing regulation focused on climate change might point us in the right direction, it certainly doesn't get us to net zero on time. The cost of doing nothing is still not visible. So it's time to create our own sense of urgency. We can do that, but it requires a mindset change. And that brings me to the next point I would like to address, the behavioral change. Through Sea Change's work, I've seen that by bringing together the different disciplines, geographies, and viewpoints in our industry, we can more quickly arrive at workable and practical solutions for many of the major barriers that face us. This accelerates change as it brings a standardized and consistent approach across the industry and helps everyone find the best way forward. Our work on transition risk guidelines, which I'll talk about more in a moment, is a good example of this. Tackling decarbonization and the retrofit challenge together requires a mindset and behavioral change, from competition to deep and radical collaboration. Whether that is companies joining forces on the most difficult topics, such as carbon pricing, or sharing existing practices of what works and what doesn't, or organizations across the sustainability spectrum partnering to support the industry. For the good of our business and the planet, we need to work together to challenge the status quo and transform our industry. As I just mentioned, Sea Change's first major piece of work is the transition risk guidelines. This is a common methodology to assess and disclose transition risks as part of property valuations. It's an important piece of work, as currently, without regulation or enough market evidence, real estate valuations do not capture the costs of getting to net zero. And if we cannot understand the impact on value, then it's much more difficult to build the business case for owners and managers to work on upgrading their buildings. This not only slows the process of decarbonizing our existing building stock, but also skews the work towards newer building first, where the business case can be instinctively stronger. We want these guidelines to support owners and managers to make the business case to retrofit all assets, not just the higher value ones, for example, offices in central business districts. In addition to collaboration at industry level, stakeholders at the building level also need to work together more closely. Through other work as part of our Sea Change program, we are engaging with occupiers, as we believe there's a strong case for collaboration between tenants and landlords when it comes to their decarbonization aims. From the work done so far, we've learned that first and foremost, it's important to understand every stakeholder's context and viewpoints. Standing in the shoes of occupiers throws up an interesting perspective. For many occupiers, the emissions impact of buildings is percentage-wise in single-digit figures, so might not be such a high priority on their decarbonization agenda. If you're a drinks manufacturer, a chemicals or pharmaceuticals company, then your priority when it comes to decarbonizing is probably not your buildings. It's likely to be your supply chains and emissions from your core processes. However, that 3 or 4% maybe of the buildings may be small, but for us as an industry, it's a vital part of the much larger 39% of emissions that we're trying to tackle. In addition, for many occupiers, their sustainability goal around buildings is to be operationally net zero. This means when looking for space, their decision-making centers around the operational efficiency of the building. Occupiers are not currently factoring in embodied carbon. This makes new build much more appealing, as automatically they can be at the cutting edge of operational net zero. To overcome these issues, we need to work closer together in a transparent way to understand each other's viewpoint better and find a common interest to define the right actions and speed up progress. Before moving on to the last topic, there's one more topic related to behavioral change I would like to address. In a competitive industry, like real estate is, progress on sustainability has been very much driven by certifications and standards. Over the past 2 decades, these have been instrumental in providing tools for the industry to become more sustainable. However, with the industry now fully focused on actual environmental performance of the building, some of these standards and certifications used in the past may no longer be so useful. At the same time, we're seeing new regulations coming into force. These have been developed for the whole investment industry to encourage more ESG investment. And, as we've seen before, it's often difficult to make these general regulations fit for real estate. The latest example in this field comes from SFDR, the Sustainable Finance Disclosure Regulation issued by the EU and on which INREV recently wrote an excellent report. SFDR aims to bring transparency to the activities of sustainable investment products and categorizes the sustainability credentials of investment funds with articles 6, 8, and 9, applying to different levels of sustainability and related reporting requirements. An Article 9 fund, as it's already called, is considered as most sustainable. And while these articles are not meant to be used as labels, not surprisingly, as that's what the industry has been used to drive sustainability, they have been misinterpreted by the industry as such. Within an Article 9 fund, the assets must already be 100% sustainable, which means new buildings and those that have already been fully retrofitted. It completely disregards the huge transformation challenge that needs to happen, and which ultimately is more sustainable as it prevents massive embodied carbon emissions. Of course, managers want to display best practice, and investors want to invest in the best. So the Article 9 fund seems to be the most appealing. However, the bigger point I would like to make with this is that the real estate industry needs to move away from a blind focus on standards and labels, but instead focus on the goal to be fully net zero by 2015 and what is needed to get there. Don't get distracted along the way by nice labels and standards, but concentrate on the actual performance, environmental performance of the building in every aspect and improve it. Only that way we will be able to achieve the target set. Finally, I would like to talk about some good news. The upside potential and the long-term value creation. Too often with decarbonization, we are focused on CapEx and downside risk when it comes to retrofitting. And I think as an industry, there are good reasons to change the narrative on that. Our buildings and cities face many challenges due to structural changes within the built environment. City centers are declining due to the change in shopping habits. How we use offices is still up in the air as we settle down to hybrid working following the pandemic. There's also a greater need for more affordable housing and a greater role and responsibility for the industry to support communities and improve social equality in our cities. Our work on retrofitting can help with this. Climate action done properly can drive social change. As we retrofit, we must also repurpose and use the green transition to build better places that suit the needs of today's workers, residents, and visitors. Again, it requires collaboration to tackle this problem at a city scale with all stakeholders. So there is much more at stake than just the decarbonization of the built environment. Certainly, we owe it to our cities to make this a fair transition to ensure our cities remain livable and investable. To accelerate change, we must put retrofitting at the heart of decarbonization. It is urgent and not easy, but together, as an industry, we can do it collaboratively. When it comes to driving this change, ultimately, it's on us. Thank you. Thank you. I would like to hand over now to Roland Hunziker, Director of the Built Environment for the World Business Council for Sustainable Development, who will lead our next panel.
Thank you very much, Lisette, for setting the scene, for a very clear message to us, no more excuses. I'm very pleased to represent the World Business Council for Sustainable Development. We're a global member-led organization with about 200 corporate members. And we help these companies on the journey to net zero, nature positive, as well as tackling inequality, not only as companies, but also through their value chains and systems of which they're part. So I'm part of the built environment team, so working with companies really all along this complex value chain. And we're here with the Race to Zero coalition, Road to Zero coalition, I'm sorry. There's also the Race to Zero. Hopefully many of you have signed up to it. That asks us also to publicly commit to take action on decarbonizing buildings. But here we are with the Road to Zero coalition, and thank you very much to ULI and the Sea Change program for embracing this collaboration, because we need to show it also as organizations focused on sustainability. So with the World Green Building Council, Institutional Investors Group on Climate Change, many partners that are here together with us animating the Road to Zero. So thank you for that. And also, very clear topic for our discussion that will follow just now. How do we accelerate, first of all? How do we collaborate? And really this, what I like about the point is this system view. The retrofit challenge is about helping us tackle the systemic issue we have in the built environment of really reducing those 40% of emissions. And we have so much building stock already. Why build new when we can reuse, and doing it with a whole system approach and whole life carbon approach? We need to look at all these emissions together. So that's enough from my side. In WBCSD, we work with companies also on tools and guidance to help us do all that. But now we're here to hear from our great panelists. It's my pleasure to introduce, let me just pick my list. Sarah Jane Firek, you are Director, Vice President ESG Europe at Prologis. If you would join me here. Hello, Sarah, thank you. We have Hélène Chartier, Director of Urban Planning and Design at C40. Katarzyna Krusceka-Spichala, the Deputy Mayor of Gdynia. Thank you very much for joining us. And last but not least, Sam Pickering, Director at Incendium Consulting, part of the Instant Group. Thank you, please join us. So, I'd just like to start with a first round hearing from each one of us, and starting with you, Kasia, if you don't mind. to tell us about the work you are doing at Gdynia to, in this spirit of collaboration, acceleration, what can a city like Gdynia do working with companies in the real estate industry and other stakeholders?
Thank you, and welcome everybody. It's been said by Lisette that usually a regulation is the best driver, but sometimes, like in our city, we have no power to adopt regulation that would be obligatory for private investors. So even though we think we know what we would like to adopt, we need to find another way in order to accelerate the process. And we have decided to adopt requirements, but for our own municipal investments. It was not an easy decision. It is not easy to practice it because most of you most probably don't know the situation of Polish local governments, but due to some political reasons, Polish local governments are now extremely poor, poorer than ever, than counting for like 30 or 40 years. So it was not easy to decide, but we were quite sure that we can't wait. There was a word game, road or race. We think it is race because unfortunately the time has already ended and we simply cannot wait. So last year the mayor of Gdynia has adopted a detailed requirements that are obligatory for every municipal building. I've written down some of them because I wouldn't like to forget about any, but we think about the areas like thermal comfort for the users, both heating and cooling, risk of urban heat island effect, blue-green infrastructure solutions, biodiversity in area, demolishment. It's very important to remember that demolishment is generally contrary to circular economy that we try to believe in. Existing and planned green surrounding of the spot, water retention, which is extremely important for seashore city like my one, energy efficiency, active mobility incentives, and water usage. And nowadays, every time we start to build a new building, which is quite a rare occasion, or we reconstruct something, or we need to do any kind of modernization, we need to have a positive opinion of a special multidisciplinary team arranged by the mayor of the city. Of course, sometimes we need to adapt because, as it's been said, standards and certificates are not always the best solution. So, as I said, we have adapted the requirements, but we met with a team and we try to make a brainstorming in order to find the best solution in order to get the goal, to get what we need. There is no single investment in a city that can be performed without being accepted by the team I've described. But of course, once again, we are just speaking about the investments conducted by the city or some parties of the city. So why is it important for the whole market? Because it's a good example and because it's an important part of a systemic view. We think that we might be a good example. We think that it might create a situation for private investors that for their image, it would be needed to act similarly to what we do. We also think that in a situation of lack of national regulation, we can collaborate closely in order to get what our, let's say, clients want from us. Speaking clients, I mean the local community, the citizens from the point of view of the city, but also the occupiers, customers of the developers and other bodies of the market. So we think that we can somehow speed up if we collaborate very frankly. But there is one condition, that each of the party is working hard and frankly and try to do the work.
Thank you, Kasia. I'd like to come back especially to that last point you made, because I think that's a part of the discussion, the frank collaboration. But clearly, example, as a city, you're driving action yourself. How do you now also work with the investors, the private sector, to uphold similar high standards? Before we go to the broader city view, let me maybe turn to our two company representatives. Sarah, I'd like to come to you first. Prologis, if I get my numbers right, you manage 1 billion square feet of mainly logistics real estate around the world. Very ambitious targets in terms of CO2 reductions and other sustainability targets. So very keen to hear from Prologis how you're driving this work yourself, but also how you collaborate with others.
Yes, thank you. Hi, everyone. Happy to be here. Sarah Jane Fierick, and yes, with Prologis, we have about 5,500 logistics buildings globally, and it's about 1,100 in Europe, over 32 billion value just in Europe. So we have quite a bit of reach, and we have a very strong ESG ethos at Prologis. We recently set a net zero target for 2040. We set that last year. We had already been signed up to the Science Based Target Initiative back in 2018, and last year upgraded that into a net zero target. And that's within our entire value chain, so Scope 1, Scope 2, and Scope 3, including our customers. So we've got 17 years to get there. We're taking our customers along with us. And so retrofits will be very much at the heart of that. We have a few interim targets within that. We're also a developer, so we plan to be carbon neutral in new construction by 2025. And we plan to have 1 gigawatt of solar by 2025 as well. We have a very robust solar program globally. We're one of the largest providers of solar energy globally. We already have about 400 gigawatts of solar now, and just continuing to ramp that up. We're already carbon neutral in our operations, and we plan to be net zero in our operations, so Scope 1 and Scope 2 by 2030. And then, of course, like I mentioned, net zero for 2040. I would just like to mention one thing. Lizette brought up a really good point in her opening comments, a few really great points. One of the ones that I see as being a big challenge right now is, transparency in terms of value. Will the first movers be penalized in terms of underwriting all of the retrofits that will be needed? How will we stay competitive in the market? How is the market looking at that? How are the lenders looking at it? There's not a lot of transparency yet on how do you look at a certified building, an EU taxonomy aligned building, or a net zero building. Is it a green premium? Is it a brown discount? So I'd like to see us continue to collaborate more in the market to get there some more transparency, and then we can continue to accelerate things. Yeah. Thanks.
Thank you, Sarah. And maybe we have some answers also in this discussion. What type of transparency would we need that also reassures everyone to make that first step? Sam, maybe turning to you, when we chatted before, I saw we have certainly many things in common. One of them is working with large global companies that, as part of their commitments, also are looking at how do we deal with basically our real estate and our building stock. So very curious to hear about your work at Incendium Consulting and your take on Lisette's challenge to us.
Yeah, very good. Hi, everyone. It's good so many people are here in the Net Zero bunker. It's great. So yeah, I think everything Lisette said is very in line with sort of my thinking, and I just feel at the moment we're in a real transformational shift. We as a company work with numerous of the major corporates that are out there, both Fortune 500 and FTSE 100 companies, and as Lisette said, I hate to burst anyone's bubbles, but actually the office portfolio in most of these is pretty small. What I would say is their focus, though, on the offices is huge and rising, and that is for a number of reasons. One is it's where all their shareholders, stakeholders, and employees work. So what you do in those buildings, how it feels, all those sort of things really matter to employees, retaining talent. And frankly, shareholders a lot, if you walk into an office and you're not recycling stuff, people judge you. I hate to say it's that tactical. The other thing we're obsessed by, and Lisette and I are very aligned on this, is the certification piece. It's infuriated me for a long time, and this is somebody who's done LEED and BREEAM assessments in the past, is I hate to burst anyone's bubble again. I'm doing lots of that during this bit, but nobody in the wider world outside of real estate knows what they are, for one. They know net zero is, and they kind of understand carbon neutrality, but all these acronyms, all these certifications, they are not going to really drive what your customers as real estate owners and individuals are. They're your customers. They're the people that need to feel and breathe sustainability within that. My main transformation point, though, is really every single client that we're working with now is going, oh my God, I've got too much office space. What am I going to do? And people are going to work from home. People are going to work in the serviced office, flex, co-working space, whatever it is. And we've really got to understand it. But fundamentally, we have got far too much space, because having one occupant for one desk is crazy. Now having 1.3 to 1.3 occupants to one desk is crazy, and they're going all the way through. It's saving them massive costs as we go into a sort of dodgy economic piece. But the reality is, and this is globally, I'm sure, the reality is nobody is really coming back to the office in the same way. And the reason I get excited by this is because it allows us to transform the office into something very, very different. And we, as part of the Instant Group, which I'm a part of, that is where we're driving this hybrid working discussion. But the reality is we won't come into CBDs, so what do we do with offices? We've talked social housing, I heard that, but there's other opportunities. Biodiversity is a big one. Just having doctor's surgeries, childcare, all this type of thing, but also just not necessarily all in the CBD. So for me, it is changed forever. The office is certainly not dead, but how we look at it is. And I think this will give us a massive opportunity, including the embodied carbon and retrofitting side, to really drive change. So that is my call to action to everyone, is we overcomplicate sustainability in the sphere that we're in. We really do. And we get obsessed by all the detailed scope 1, scope 2, and scope 3. The reality is it's fundamental business shifts, and that mindset shift that Lisette brought up is what will change. But it is changing, and I hate to say it again, but the offices of the future will be very different in terms of what they look like now.
Thank you, Sam. There's no way back to the previous system, and the big driver for that change. I'd like to come back afterwards to this whole question of valuation and the Sea Change initiative. But before we do that, Hélène, you work with so many global cities. C40 is no longer C40. I think it's C100 now. And years ago, you launched the deadline 1.5. So really, mayors saying, look, we need to drive this action. How do you react to this situation? Do you see similar things happening across the global cities you are working with?
Yes, and I want to say it's quite, first, I think the way Lisette set the scene was very impressive and so aligned with what mayors are trying to push in their agenda. And so we are really seeing this discussion coming on, and we see how years by year the discussion on buildings and the focus are changing. And I think now the big focus in how we focus on retrofit the existing building and focus on urban regeneration to tackle urban sprawl and bad urbanism models that has been spread after the World War II. So there is a big focus of our cities on this, and I think that's really what matters. Before the pandemic, we know that on average, we were building the equivalent of the floor area of the city like New York every month in the world. It's important to say, because I think even if we build net zero operational, I think there is a voice in our head who clearly sees this cannot be sustainable. And I think so there is a need of thinking how we focus, make the most of what we already have, and try to change the market. And it's something that the mayors have really integrated, and there is a need of the discussion with the business sector to see how they can also transform their business model in this. And I want to take a couple of examples that come from the United States, mainly. I mean, North America, mostly, because I will start with the Canadian example, Vancouver, who has been definitely one of the leading cities on embodied emission. They have really started the discussion on embodied emission, asking for transparency, whole life cycle analysis since already years, and now trying to tackle. And they recently, like a couple of years ago, announced one empty home tax, trying also to push push the private owners to bring back their value, their asset in the market. And it has been such a great success that they have already announced they will triple the home tax, and in 2 years they will multiply by 5. And they redirect all of the benefits from this home tax in the in social housing development. So that's also, so cities are also trying to integrate this type of discussion. And I want to say they are pushed by the citizen, because the citizen also see what you were mentioning, and all of the transformation of the office especially. And there is a lot of pushback in our cities also on new construction, and especially on new construction of offices. So as a political leader, they also try to adjust their vision and to integrate these aspects. I want just to mention the French example, because we are here. In France, we know that there is, on average, 7 to 8% of empty home in the country. And when we discuss that, some people say, "Oh, but this is not where the market is. Is very active." It's not true, actually. Paris itself is more than 8% of vacant home. So this is a real discussion we need to have, and it's not talking about offices building, and despite that, we continue to build. So there is really a need to accelerate this discussion and to see how we can focus on this building, transforming them, renovating them, and that's a very important discussion within the mayors of the C40 network.
Thank you, Hélène. Really compelling examples also, this vacant home tax, right, is what it's called. In a second round, I'd like to talk a little bit more about that collaboration, because I think in reality it's not that easy, and I'd like to hear in particular, between cities, the real estate sector and others. I often hear, well, there's tension, and how can we overcome that? Before we go there, after the round, I'd like to also see if there are questions from the floor. So please, if you have some, get ready. There's one mic that we need to move around, so please have some patience. But also just picking up on the comment before around actual performance and transparency, and that we need to increasingly take our decisions based on real performance. Just a shout out to a report that Schneider Electric are publishing today, where they actually did a carbon assessment on a decision whether to refurbish or build new for a whole new campus development. And what I really like about that work, they do that full life cycle assessment, and that guides their decision. We have to look at the embodied carbon, we have to look at the operational, how can we maximize both? And it's just, you may agree or not with the conclusion they're drawing, but the fact how they've done it really drives that transparency. Now, maybe I'd like to turn that question back to you, Sarah. What you said, not sure I paraphrase it correctly, how do we align among many stakeholders what we mean with the transparency, and how do we assess value so that it doesn't, the first mover could be penalized in certain things? Could you maybe elaborate a little bit more, not asking you to answer your own question, but elaborate a little bit more on that, what you mean?
Yeah, sure. I think I'd like to answer in a couple different ways. I think the valuation question is one, and that's really eventually how the market will look at it, and how we need to build that into our models, et cetera. But when you're looking at the business model, I think Lisette mentioned, can we change our view of retrofit so it's not sort of a negative view? And I think that there's definitely ways to do that. I think that we need to bring all of our stakeholders along. And if you can bring all of your stakeholders along and looking at the retrofit question, and you can find that sweet spot that really works for everybody, then you can have that great, fantastic intersection between ESG and business value, and really benefiting all of the stakeholders. So Prologis has a a platform called Essentials, and which we use to offer certain services which are not necessarily real estate. And some of those are sustainability products. And I really like to use our example of LED. We call it our LED Essentials program. And when you take LED, what we've done is, if you look at LED is great, especially in a logistics warehouse where there's so much lighting. If you upgrade the lighting, you make a massive improvement already on the operational carbon. So you've checked the box of environmental. That's a good, fantastic way. And then you've already checked the box also on the social side, because the people that are working in the facility now have better lighting, they have safer working conditions. Now, if Prologis can front the costs of that upgrade, and we do so utilizing our platform, which is, as I mentioned, it's very large, and so we can really take advantage of that platform, and we can find great partners to not interrupt the operations of the customer very much. We can front the cost of that. The customer can pay some back over the period of its time, but they're the ones that are reaping the benefit of the energy savings, of the operational costs. So it's a net benefit to them. So therefore, you've checked all of the boxes, and you've hit that sweet spot. So that is another goal that Prologis has, to have 100% LED across our global portfolio by 2025. And why do we feel comfortable signing up to that? Yeah, because it's a business model that works. So can we apply that to solar? Can we apply that to heat pumps? We're looking at all of the different retrofits that are needed, and we can say, okay, how can we take along all of the stakeholders here? We also look at that, we apply it also to the social side when we look at our parks. So normally our assets are not located in a one-off location. They're usually located or grouped together in parks. And what's the benefit of a park? Well, it's like a community on its own. And so we have a program called Park Life, which to me is a mindset, and it's looking at what is the relationship between the people working on the park, the facilities, the actual what's offered at the park and at the assets, nature, being both animals and the environment, and the surrounding community as well. And how can we foster the relationship between all of those stakeholders and make it good business value as well? And so we can make investments that the surrounding community can use, perhaps a community center on the park, sport courts, walking trails, those kinds of things. The customer is happier because they have better retention. They can bring in more workers onto the park because it's a nicer place to work. We can also offer community workforce training, so logistics training, and even more general workforce training for people in the surrounding communities on how to work in the logistics industry, but also even how to create a CV. So I think when you look at it from that mindset for the business people in the room, of like, how can you create the business value but also take all of your stakeholders along, that's going to be the catalyst to make things move, because we can't wait for legislation to do something. I mean, if we were to wait for legislation to do something at Prologis, we wouldn't have any customers anymore. Our customers also have their own net zero plans, and they want to know exactly what Prologis is doing for their portfolio and when. And so we've got to move. We have to move now. But there's a way that we can do it in a positive way, I think, both for the business line and for the ESG.
Thank you for these excellent, very practical examples, Sarah. In terms of that collaboration and really not waiting for regulation, how do you see that, the main challenges around the collaboration, especially that landlord-tenant-occupier conversation, which is very traditional, I understand?
Yeah, and I think you know it too, Roland. It's really traditional in the sense I don't think it's a true sort of customer relationship with occupiers at all. And I think one other point I just wanted to sort of just touch on as well, because I'll come back to it. That relationship is fundamental to this, but it comes down to an understanding of what that customer that's in that building, how they work. I mean, at the moment, during COVID times, it's not as though everyone shut off the lights, turned off the HVAC, locked the doors and walked out and everything went to zero. It didn't. They really, 20% reduction, probably 30% tops. These buildings were still whirring around, okay? And we've lived in a world 9 to 5, Monday to Friday. So you've got 2 days that are wasted based on that. And now we're in a world where actually nobody's really in the office on a Monday and a Friday. And even if you've got LEED or BREEAM or whatever it is, you still cannot control and shut down the floors that you want to, because the systems are controlled by a landlord, or the systems, which is great big central plant, doesn't allow you to do it for whatever reason. BMS is in it, all the technical bits that get quite boring. But the fundamental thing is, the way we're all working is different, so we've got to change that. And that collaboration is required from a corporate sort of really official mandatory reporting perspective. I just need data. Well, that's all I want. If I'm a corporate in one of your buildings, I just want your data. I'd like that every month if I could. Every quarter would be really nice, but you've got to give it to me every year. And that still hasn't changed. People talk about green leases all the time. I've worked major corporates. It's always the lawyer's fault, if you ask me, because as soon as you put anything in, they scrub it out. And that's simply, give me some data. Go, no, we can't do that. And it's both ways, to be fair. I do totally understand that. But because of the major corporates' kind of goals, that's changing. But the landlord side is not. And having done this for well over 15 years now, I'm slightly astounded nothing has really changed on that simple bit before you get into any of the things we're sort of discussing today, really. So I personally, if I was anyone, I would get to really understand what people, and it doesn't even have to be corporates, just how people are interacting and how they want to work. And that, I've got a feeling, will then change the way you look at your business model. Is it standard leases in some place, co-working, virtual offices, flex offices, whatever it might be. But if you don't change some of these models, it will be a problem. One more thing, if I could, very
please,
quickly.
absolutely.
Just going back to the lease points, is in the olden days, we used to sign leases for 20 years, and somebody would move in, they'd strip it out, they'd fit it out, load of embodied carbon there, but it's all right. We amortise that through 20 years. Now what's happening, they're 5 years, and you've got different businesses stripping out carpet, furniture, all this stuff, and that's happening in 5-year blocks. That cannot go on. So then that's before we retrofit stuff and make it look nicer. That's just the stuff internally, which makes up about a third, by the way, of the life cycle. So it's all these things when it comes to collaboration, treating people like a customer and understanding that that customer is frankly sitting in this room and they want to work in a different way. Sorry, I got a bee in my bonnet.
No, it's great. And I just wonder, is there something for us to do here? All these companies who are either in the race to zero or have their science-based targets and occupy a lot of space, quite frankly, can we create somewhat of an occupier movement to say we will all adopt a certain level of green leasing? I know green lease is a challenging topic. Whenever you discuss it, there's lots of views. But is there something where we could really drive best practice and really accelerate that conversation? In the retrofit discussion, I think this would be excellent. But just maybe moving on, also the city view again. Kasia, you've been saying we do a lot as a city, but then when it comes to working with other stakeholders, you're quite modest. You're saying we need to bring them along, we need to convene. Can you do more than that? Can cities be a bit more forceful and just say, look, we are in a climate emergency, and so if you're doing business here, here is certain things that we expect from you. So how far can you go, and how much do you need to stay as a convincer rather than an enforcer?
The answer might be long or short. If you choose short, we can't do anything more because we are not enlightened by legislation. But if I may use the longer answer, yes, we can. And this is the story about leadership. And I think leadership is extremely important in this story. Lisette has mentioned that if I don't remember if it was about producing furniture, yeah? If your priority is to produce furniture, you don't think so much about your footprint. But we try to convince people, not only the developers and investors, we try to convince people that it is important to watch and notice your footprint. Once again, we started with ourselves. You can enter the website of the city, and there is a special site devoted to our footprint. We count it regularly, and in the smallest details, people can also compare how it looked yesterday or a year ago and how it is looking today. It makes people thinking there's a real reason to take all the activities. It's not a new implementation of let's say, stupid officer from European Union who don't see anything from behind their desk. It's something that works and changes our life. It is quite easy to adopt in Gdynia, which is a seashore city with the best air quality all over Poland and well known for a great quality of life. I think it might be a bit more difficult to implement, like, for example, in industrial cities. But in my city, it truly convinces both citizens and both workers, which are very important for the industry, because still one of the biggest problems that we are facing is the pool talent. So what workers like, what employees like, is quite important for occupiers of the offices or any other spaces. And finally, to the investors. One important thing is that you never can lie. If I say that we need to be a good example, we truly need to be a good example. If we are retrofitting a school, we need to do all the best that we can. We need to adopt PV, heat pump, grey water tank, and so on and so on. But this is not the end of the story. If we are going to the zero emission point, it's not just in building, even though I said we are counting it. Of course, we are counting it, and even in Gdynia, the city with the clearest air over Poland, 2/3 of emissions comes from building. So it's a huge challenge. But still, 1/3 is from another sources. So there's a lot of activities you need to take in order to get zero emission point. And you need to prove that we're really doing it. Like, for example, that we think about zero emission in public transport, we think about zero emission I mentioned a school. This is not a priority for a school to count their footprint. Their priority is to teach children, but they also make emission. So we need to show to the society that we take care of it. And even though the school is devoted to teach children, we think about the footprint it produces and to prove that we try to make it better. We think even about things like, for example, feeding children in schools. And we can truly prove to the society that we can make a difference. I believe that acting like that will become credible. And we educate the society. If we educate the society, we had a kind of a feedback loop, because both citizens and customers want something new from both their city and their investors who build something for them or are retrofitting something for them. So this is my point of view. First of all, you need to truly work. Then you need to be extremely transparent and show all the data you can provide, and then you never can lie. Sometimes we fail. Then let's show and let's discuss why it happened. Maybe the standard was stupid. Maybe the standard was wrongly adopted. But there's always a learn that you can get from such a condition.
Thank you very much, Kasia, for these examples also from Gdynia. Hélène, just again, taking the view of the many different cities you're working with, and not just Europe, North America, but also globally, where do you see the main challenges in bringing together that kind of common vision? Leadership by the city, yes, but then also really bring the real estate and the overall industry along.
I would like to give 3 examples. The first one comes from New York, who has been, so New York's emission is 70% is the building. So their climate objective is really focused on building today. And they have probably passed one of the most pioneer rules. Basically, all of the owner of building in New York has to retrofit their building by 2030. And to support them, they have done really 2 things, like tax incentive and everything, but also they have really organized a form of task force to support each of them. They have mapped the emission that come from each of the buildings in the cities. They have approached each of the building owners to work with them and to see, okay, how can you do it? Here's some technical support to do it. They have also to think about every rooftop in the city of New York has to have a purpose. So they say it has to be a terrace, it has to be for energy, or it has to be for green space. So they have really support these things. The second example I would like to give, it's from Paris. but I think similar examples from many cities. It's how I think one of the challenge on retrofitting existing building is the multi-owner building. And so, so the city has really created a dedicated agency who is working with all of the multi-owner building copropriété, as we say in French, to really work with them and to help them to build their project, plus financial support, which is in addition to the national support to help accelerate this retrofit of existing building. And I was discussing with the director of this l'Agence Parisienne du Climat, and she was telling me that since the energy crisis, the public meetings they are organizing in this topic, they are totally overwhelmed. So there is an opportunity, and what is interesting is that they put these people in contact also with a list of good society business who can help them to deliver and everything. So it's also making the contact between the people, the citizen, with the business who can deliver and help them to do. The third example is from Milan in Italy, which I think is very interesting because we also need the creativity of the business sector. And we have one of the key projects we have leading at C40 is called Reinventing Cities, based on the Reinventer Paris example. We have developed that in 15 cities now. In Milan, it has been especially a great success. The first edition, we are now running the third edition, and the first edition was really on very attractive project, and it has really helped the city to accelerate the discussion on clean construction, different use of material, wood. Even the city were telling, oh no, wood construction for us is not possible, it doesn't exist. Now, with this competition, we have really started the discussion in the city of Milan and in Italy, I would say, on this. And the last edition we are working on now is how we regenerate social housing neighborhood from the 70s, which is a major topic. You know, I was discussing with Prague, who was telling me basically 60% of my housing building stock is the typical building from the 70s. How I can regenerate, not only retrofit the building and find a financial model, but also regenerate the entire neighborhood, because there is a lot of mixed use, the public space are not. So we have created with the city of Milan a specific reinventing housing on this typology of neighborhood, and we thought it would be super challenging, but actually we have investor, architect, like consortium who come and really create very innovative, not only project, but business model to try to find a solution for this type of neighborhood. So we also need the creativity of the business. But, and if I can finish, I remember David Chipperfield, the architect, the UK architect, who was telling me real estate sector is very innovative, but they don't innovate for the good reason. The real question is to focus on the good reason. And the good topic today is regeneration and retrofit.
I think we could close the panel on these words, because the Reinventing Cities program, for those who don't know it, it's really great. And it really makes the link also to regeneration. How do we also socially improve these cities? And it brings the vision to your last point, because everybody's ready to innovate, but you need a convener, you need that vision together. Thank you so much for that, Hélène. Now, we were a little chatty in our second round, so time is a bit against us. I did want to open for maybe just one or two questions, if there are. Yeah, Andrea? Do you have someone? You want to ask the question yourself? There's one here in the front and one on the side. Yeah, just so quick question, quick answer. Thank you.
I can make it a bit more brief even. It's going to be an answer, and the answer to a statement that was made twice, actually. So twice it was said on stage, it was discussed really, that there's this concern of a penalty being associated with being a first mover in sustainability. And now to put two questions, but towards the audience, raise of hands questions. Do you believe that there is a risk associated with climate change? Hands up if you do. Quite a few people. Wonderful. So, second question, cast ourselves back in our mind to the year 1993. Same raise of hands. Do you believe there's an opportunity in investing in the internet, digitization, IT, the whole computer shebang? Raise of hands if you do. So, still a few people. So, having decided in 1993 to invest into that kind of stuff, you would have probably found an opportunity in there, would have been a lucrative decision. Having been a first mover in that field in 1993 would have certainly not been penalized. Having asked the audience whether they see a risk in climate change, they all agree, so it doesn't make sense for it to be penalized in any way, because there's a risk associated with it, and in risk management, the two factors that you're looking at is it likely that the thing is going to happen, and what are the consequences of the thing happening? Risk, very high, consequences, devastating. Therefore, logical conclusion, no risk associated, no penalty with being a first mover in anything related to sustainability.
Thank you very much. Strong statement. I don't know, does anyone want to quickly react? Otherwise, we'll take it into the coffee discussion afterwards. But thank you for that.
Yeah, thank you for your comment. I completely agree. Yep. I mean, yeah, obviously there's a huge risk of doing nothing. Yeah, that's really my comeback to everybody. What is the risk if we don't do something? Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you. Please.
Question for Sarah Jane. With your new construction, how are you addressing embodied carbon with your net zero ambitions?
So we are, sorry, maybe I can step a little bit so I can see you a bit. We are, on our new developments, we're doing life cycle assessments on every single development now, globally. So we've already been building to a BREEAM excellent standard usually, or above. We're now building to EU taxonomy standard, but those labels are fine, but we have to really look at the numbers for the embodied carbon. So now we're globally, as part of our carbon neutral and new construction goal for 2025, life cycle assessments for every asset globally. And then looking at, it's fine, I think, to do the life cycle assessment, but on a platform like ours, which is so big, how do we roll up all of that information globally and really be able to disseminate the information both on a regional and local basis, but also globally, and be able to properly share the information on, we tried this over here, we tried this low carbon concrete over here in the yard, but it's rubbing away. What are the things that are working? What are the things that are not working? And how can we roll it all up and learn from it over time? So that's really, I think, what's going to be the most interesting thing over the next couple years is being able to roll up what we're learning from the LCAs and compare them and then share it across the globe. And then we'll use, obviously, that figure in our carbon neutral by 2025 goal. Does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you very much for putting the focus also on embodied carbon. I'm afraid we do have to take the conversation into the coffee break now. I'd like to really thank the panel for this conversation. Just on that last point, and I forgot to mention in the case of Schneider Electric's intensity case study, WBCSD, we put out a real simple framework to measure that whole life carbon, and you just need to fill all the boxes. You need to get the numbers right. You can look that up in the Net Zero Buildings Where Do We Stand report, where we did that for many buildings. And we believe if more actors adopt that approach, if the construction firms start doing it, the engineering firms, Arup committed to do that 2 years ago. They have now a whole database of projects. And if we can create that transparency, then we can really start talking about the absolute reductions that we need. We need to halve emissions by 2030 globally, from 14 gigatons to 7 gigatons. Retrofit is one huge response to that. But obviously, if we look beyond Europe and North America, we also need to really improve the way we build in the first place. So thank you. The Road to Zero stage, we have 3 main mottos. It's radical collaboration. It needs us all. No more excuses for any of us to act. And the last one is we need to bring everyone on the journey. And I think we've really illustrated all these aspects on this panel, and I'd like to thank you for that. Enjoy MIPIM, and see you around.